there we have it. Now this is going to be experimental too, because I have a mix of Copics, which I love, best markers on the market as far as I'm concerned, and these much cheaper, oops, I got some worms in here, generic brand, that's a Copic, did I lie? Oh no, here we go, alcohol-based marker, Artist Loft. So we're gonna see if these work together, and this might be a colossal failure. But again, motivational speech. Can't let that slow us down. Okay, C7, very dark gray, and this I'm going to use. When I work in gouache, which is primarily what I use for illustration, for coloring and illustration, I'll almost always stick to gouache. If I'm working on a canvas, it's oils. I despise acrylics, absolutely can't stand them. It's amazing to me what some guys like, oh my god, like Joe Jusko works in acrylics and blows my freaking mind. Aside from also being like one of just the nicest guys in the world. I got to hang out with him last Comic-Con I was at. I got to have dinner with he and his wife. And aside from just being the nicest guy, what that guy does in acrylics blows my mind. I can't work in acrylics. They dry way too fast. And I didn't realize for the longest time that some of these guys, Simon Bisley, Jusko, a lot of these paintings that I was convinced were in oil and were just too good to be in acrylic, actually were in acrylic, and that's, you know, because acrylic is just dries so fast. I can't work with it. Give me oil paint on canvas any day. And but anyway, all this to say that I generally stick to the Winsor Newton gouache when I'm doing an illustration on paper. And when I do, I always go dark to light, which is the opposite of what they taught me to do in art school. They say go light to dark when you're using a water medium like a watercolor or a gouache, because you can always go darker, but you can never go lighter. And I found this to be great advice for most. But as a guy who, I don't know what it is, I think it's because I work with a lot of ink and I spot my blacks. I think for that reason, that, and because I don't like being told what to do, of course, but I think primarily for that reason, I much prefer going dark to light. So I'm going to be doing the same thing with these Copic markers. These are great for blending. They're very painterly. And yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my darkest, which is a C7. I think they go C8, C9, I don't know, but for me this is dark enough because I can layer them. And then I'm just going to go light. And that's what's so great about these Copics, is that you can layer them and blend them. So rather than having to carry my gouache paint around, if I'm hanging out just downtown at a library, anything like that, I just feel like doodling, I can just pull up markers and it's easier and it gives me a nice painterly effect. The freaking king, undisputed, of illustration with Copics is unsurprisingly Mr. Adam Hughes, as far as I'm concerned, who's also the king of illustrating just about everything else. But when I first made the transition to Copic markers, I watched a lot of his videos on YouTube and how to use them. Ditto when I first discovered the Winsor Newton gouache. I was introduced to those by Alex Ross. All these people that I've never met, but years and years and years ago, Wizard Magazine released an Alex Ross, Wizard Magazine, the Guide to Comics, which isn't even in print anymore, but I was living in Montreal. I just moved to Montreal. I was a very young man, and they released a whole Alex Ross special where he, it's just a magazine where he went through tips and tricks and his techniques, and they showed all kinds of different works of his, and I was so enamored with it that I immediately saved up my money and went out and bought Winsor Newton gouache, and God, that's going back about over 20 years, and I haven't looked back. And ditto with these markers. I was introduced to Copic's. Man, actually now I can't even remember. I can't remember who introduced me to Copic's, but I definitely credit Adam Hughes as being the guy who really taught me how to use these. I've been very, very lucky in getting to meet a lot of these guys. Growing up, I remember the first Comic-Con I ever went to. Growing up, my heroes, my rock stars were comic book artists. And the first Comic-Con I ever went to when I was living in Montreal, where I met Yannick Paquette and Jeff Isherwood, who would later on come to be the biggest influences on me, the biggest mentors I could have. I remember being so freaking starstruck. It was just, like, I was just geeking right out, man. I remember the first big celebrity I met was Adam Kubert. Also just a freaking amazing guy, and I was just so blown away. Oh my God, I'm talking to Adam Kubert, like wow. Or Kubert, I believe it's called, and pronounced like the video game. I was just so blown away, and he could tell how just like starstruck I was too. I was just like, Mr. Kubert, I love you. And I ended up just glomming onto that guy and chatting with him like as much as I possibly could the whole day. And these days, whenever I see him at Comic-Con or his brother, Andy, I race up to them and just chat as much as I can. They're so friendly, so helpful. Would love to go to the school, the Kubert School of Cartooning in Jersey, but that's a pipe dream. I'd never be able to afford it. And recently, Emma Kubert, who is Andy's daughter, I started following on Instagram just to see, like, hey, what kind of a legacy do they have? When Joe passed away, never got a chance to meet Joe Kubert. For those of you who aren't into comics, got to remember that sometimes I'm talking to people who aren't big-time comic geeks. Let me just tell you that Joe Kubert, legendary artist. Comic book artist who is the father of Andy and Adam, two of the best comic book artists in the business, and he recently passed away. I never got a chance to meet him, but man, that hit me hard. I'm so sorry for that family. But anyway, more positive news. I recently started following Emma, who is the daughter of Andy, on Instagram, and wow, she's got some great stuff. I sent her a message basically saying like, hey, I followed you because I'm a big fan of your dad and your uncle, and so I decided to follow you, and wow, really love it, and keep up the great work. I'm sure that your parents are proud of you. Way to keep the Kubert dynasty going. And she was really nice. She messaged me back and said, oh, thank you. And she was a real sweetheart. So, yeah, these are the people that I'm incredible fans of. Okay, I think that's all my darkest tones. Now let's move on to, what do we got? So that is a C7. Do we have a C5? Do we have a C5? I have a C3. Let's see what I get out of this. Again, work with what we have. It's too light, man. Darren, that's not gonna do. It's too light, dude. Alright, let's go see if I can dig up a C5. Okay, no C5, but I have an N5, which is a neutral 5. C means cool, N is neutral. And you know what? Is there a rule that says we're not supposed to combine? Yeah, this is unfortunately way too close. It's okay because, like I said, they do get layered, right? So it doesn't have to be perfect. But it's very, very close in value to the one I was just using. So when I go light, I'm going to have to do like when I do make my way to the C3. I'm going to have to do about 2 or 3 layers, I think. But everybody that comes out of that school, the Kubert School of Cartooning, definitely they know what they're doing because they've got the best instructors in the world. Tell you a very funny story about Neil Adams. So for those of you, again, who don't know, Neil Adams is one of the greatest comic book illustrators that has ever lived. And he's still around, still making comics, and still just as influential and just as amazing. And he also has a reputation of being a real spitfire, a real ornery guy, and I like people like that. As you can tell by the name Master of Shenanigans, I do believe that the world is much too politically correct these days. I like people that are kind of ornery and don't mind telling it like it is and aren't necessarily concerned with sparing people's feelings all the time. Which is to say that I have a higher tolerance than most people when it comes to those kinds of individuals. But Neil Adams has a reputation of sending people off just crying after he does portfolio reviews. And I got a chance to meet him several times. And the first time I ever met Neil, I stood in line like everybody else, watched him just destroy one person after another with his portfolio reviews. And I was there with a book that I was working on, and he just destroyed it, and it was great. It was one of the best things that could have ever happened to me, because no one learns anything by having someone blow sunshine at you. And if you're watching this and you're an illustrator or you're a painter, and someone keeps consistently telling you how great you are, it's nice to hear, but it's not really helping you. In fact, I had a buddy, Zachariah, the guy got into the argument, here's my C3, about who's physically stronger, Superman or Batman. We argue about everything. In terms of politics, he's very liberal, I'm very conservative, both atheists, but we tend to disagree on just about everything. But anyway, where was I going with this? He and I are generally very, very polite when it comes to normal everyday situations. You know, when I lived in Montreal, I haven't seen him in years, but when I lived in Montreal, if for instance he and his wife would have me over for dinner, you know, we would always be polite to each other. Oh, this is really wonderful, thanks so much for having me over, and we would obey common courtesies and stuff like that. However, we had a rule that when it came to criticizing each other's artwork, we would not pull punches. Why? Because you're not doing yourself any favors. So if you were a fly on the wall when, you know, watching as we sort of would criticize each other's artwork, you would think, man, these guys must hate each other. They're the two most rude people I've ever met. Can't they say anything nice? But that was the rule. That was the rule. It's just, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And that's how you learn, right? So, back to Neil Adams. I'm sitting there having him just destroy artwork that I spent a lot of time on, telling me, oh my God, this is terrible. You don't know what you're doing. This is awful. And here's what you need to do. And I just ate it up and just memorized. If I would have had a recorder on me, I would have recorded it. But I memorized everything he said because he was right about everything. This guy knows what the hell he's talking about. And he doesn't have to be polite. And so what I did is, well, here's the funny part of the story. I did say this was funny. This one page, I had a bunch of people riding horses. And he says to me, he says, are these horses? And I mean, I had used some reference, but I was pretty lazy about it. And I said, yeah. And he says, on what planet are these horses? And of course he was right. The anatomy was all wrong. It was, I'd basically just taken a shortcut. And he called me out on it. And so he's, on what planet? So what I did is, rather than go and cry myself to sleep at night, I was staying at my sister's house. This was in Toronto, and she has a place near there. So that's where I was staying. So that night, when the con closed its doors, I went straight back to her house, and all I did was draw horses. You know, went on the internet, looked up horses, learned whatever I could about horses. And since that time, I've actually bought toy horses, and I keep them lying around with my sort of wooden mannequin maquettes that I use to help me with anatomy. And so a few years later, of course he doesn't remember who I am, he critiques so many portfolios. A few years later, I'm heading down to another Comic-Con. I believe this one was in Toronto as well, or it could have been Niagara Falls. And I worked on this book. I spent a lot of time on it, and I go and I see Neil Adams, and I say, hey, would you be interested in seeing my portfolio? And I think he did kind of remember who I was, which was really, really cool, because he, you know, he sees so many different portfolios. But vaguely, it was like a vague recollection of who I was, probably just because I'm funny looking. And anyway, so he takes a look at my portfolio, and of course, just at this comic book that I've been working on, just destroys the hell out of it. Oh my God, this is awful, this is awful, this is wrong, like you really butchered this. And then at the end of it, he says to me, he says, well, at least your horses look good. So that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is a win. And yes, as you might have guessed, I went and worked on everything he told me. Jeff Isherwood, great friend, great mentor. Whenever I would see him at a Comic-Con, he lived in Montreal while I was there. I think he's in Ottawa now. And we've since collaborated on projects, which has been a huge honor. But when I first met Jeff, and I got to know him, while I'd see him at a Comic-Con, same thing with Yannick Paquette. I would see them at a Comic-Con, and I would get them to draw something for me. I would always ask, like, please, 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 can I just stand there and watch you draw, and can you give me tips as you're doing it? I mean, you know, you're talking to these legends in the industry. It would be crazy for me not to learn whatever I could, right? And anyway, I just recently contacted Jeff again because this coronavirus has left me so broke. I contacted him and asked him if he knew of any jobs, and Jeff, being an awesome person, got back to me with whatever he had. He said, here's a comic project that I don't have time to do. You can take it, you know, whenever I need work. He's one of the people that I'll call. Interestingly enough, when I got sober, I went to a Comic Con in Toronto, and I saw Leonard Kirk, I saw Jeff Fisherwood. I don't think Yannick Paquette was there. And I remember these guys saying to me, like Jeff especially, like, Darren, like, where have you been? We thought you were dead. And I basically said I was. I said, what have you been doing for the past, 8 years since I've seen you? And I said, drinking. Oh, are you drinking now? No. In fact, I'm sober and I'm working on building up my portfolio again. So the story with Jeff is I showed him my portfolio and he said, okay, this is good. And we chatted for a while, got caught up. He was glad to hear that I was sober. And then, it's going back a few years now. And then he called me up here in Sault Ste. Marie and said, hey Darren, I got this project for Iron Maiden where I'm going to be supposed to be illustrating their comic book, and I don't have a lot of free time, but I could ink it if you wanted to do the pencils. So I backflipped at that opportunity, and I ended up drawing the Iron Maiden comic book, and then Jeff, being the inker, was able to turn my chicken scratchings into something that looked almost legible. That was such a great project to work with. Someone that I admire so much. And then he and I went to the Niagara Falls Comic Con together and pitched that book. In the interim, I've been working on my own creator-owned project that's going to be coming out through Chapter House, publishing company out of Toronto, towards the end of the year. But because of the coronavirus, I'm so freaking broke. I had to ask. I called him up again and asked, dude, do you know of anything? And he threw another couple of projects my way. So big thanks to Jeff. Awesome guy, awesome mentor. And even though this is the red of the costume, there's going to be some cast shadow because it comes right underneath his butt here. So I'm going to put a little bit of cast shadow in there. And with that, I think this one is pretty much done. I'm going to take a moment just to see if there's anything else I want to add, and also to make myself some food. I'm going to put some eggs on the frying pan, sit down, have a big meal. Who knows, maybe even have a nap afterwards. But I shall return once I am fed. Food. Can you imagine? I lived on like one hot dog of sustenance every 3 weeks or so when I was drinking. Look at this masterpiece I just made. We'll call this the intermission of my drawing, only because I forgot to tell my greatest Comic Con story. I'm going to get into that right now. Comic Con, Toronto. A few years back, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm talking to Adam Kubert, and he mentions to me, I don't know how it got started, but I mentioned that I was a magician, and he tells me, oh, you know who else is a magician? Lee Weeks. Lee Weeks, I cried. The greatest, arguably Daredevil artist of all time. The guy who spots his blacks, who understands lighting better than any comic book artist that I can know of. Graduate of the Kubert School. So I run over there, and I wait in line respectively, like as he talks to all of his fans. Lee Weeks is there signing autographs. I have him take a look at my portfolio. If you have time, very polite. He does, very pleasant man. And then he tells me, then I mentioned to him, I said, oh, I heard you're a magician. I've been doing magic for this many years. He pulls out a couple of magic props. I perform what I know with what he has. And we hit it off. We talked about magic. We talked about comics. I lived at that table for the entire weekend. I was basically Lee Weeks' assistant. And when the Comic-Con closed and everybody had to leave, he insisted that I get to stay behind, and I helped him clean up his stuff, and we exchanged information, and we're still in contact to this day. So there you go, a story about making the most of opportunities. When I would go to Comic-Con, I would sleep in line to make sure I was the first person there to talk to these people, and I still to this day, a lot of work, but I have just the fondest memories, as you can tell, from Comic-Con. Okay, now I'm gonna eat and then I'm gonna finish this. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, the master of shenanigans has been fed, and I realize that I just have one final thing I want to do here. Got a bottle of Indie ink. We need a little bit of a mixture of blood and slobber. I've got my library card. Any card will do. Credit card will do. Naturally, I've never had a credit card because no one would be insane enough to give me one. A little dollop of Indie ink in the corner. And we have some blood splatter. A little bit to clean up in here, maybe. And the final touch, toothbrush, Indie ink, and oh, you know what? I'm gonna grab a paper towel for this. Dab the excess so we don't get any unnecessary blobs. I learned this lesson the hard way. And a little bit of blood splatter here. That should probably do, I think. Now, all I have to do is wait for this area to dry so I can touch it up. I want the blood flying out of his mouth. That means that it doesn't really necessarily need to be here. But you know, men, we have no aim. We tend to splash around. Any women out there watching this who are married know exactly what I'm talking about. I actually really enjoyed speaking about my Comic-Con experiences right at the very end there. I was kind of getting into that, so I might do more of that. Talk about mentors. I haven't really had a chance to talk about my magic mentor, the amazing Todd Shapiro. I really want to talk about him. I haven't really had a chance to talk about God, some of these people that I met were just so good to me. Amanda Connor, Jimmy Palmiotti, great people that I met, really, really nice. We lost my favorite illustrator of all time, Bernie Wrightson, my all-time favorite illustrator. We lost him, and I am very grateful that I got a chance to meet Bernie. I went to his table at Comic-Con, and he wasn't there. And because he wasn't there, there was no line. And so what I did is I just camped out. I just sat there. And security would come by and ask, "Are you okay?" if I nodded off and fell asleep, which is their job. And I said, "Yep, I'm just waiting for Bernie Wrightson." And finally he showed up, and I was the first one there. And of course, within a moment, there was a huge line of people waiting to meet him, but I was there first. And I got to talk to him. I got a chance to tell him how much his work was appreciated. And then it was shortly after that he passed away. And we lost the great one. But let's call this one done. Until next time.